In part 10, we left off with the following. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Where time typifies the Lord's coming to the Jews and the lost sheep of the house of Israel, times denotes what follows after, that is, the times of the Gentiles or nations. In agreement with Luke 21, we find the following. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, "Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there, but do not measure the court outside the temple." Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. Here John is given a measuring rod like a staff. The King James renders this as a reed like unto a rod. This word is found 12 times in the King James New Testament. This is appropriate because the reed is used to measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. Measuring and judgment go hand in hand, where judgment is rendered based on our standard of measure. Note that John is told to rise before he measures the temple of God and the altar. This suggests the need to ascend to a higher state of being before proper judgment can be given. Also note that John is told not to measure the court outside the temple, which is then called the holy city. The court outside the temple or holy city speaks of the called, while the temple of God and the altar denote the chosen. How do we know? Because when something is measured, it is given a number. That being said, we find the following. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. What did John hear? The number 144,000, typifying those who were not only called, but chosen, just as the 120 in the upper room on the day of Pentecost. When we multiply 120 by 12, we arrive at 1,440. Remember this number? It's the day or 24 times the hour or 60. We could break this down further as 2 times, 12 times, 6 times 10, or the witness of divine government regarding man's enmity with his Maker through the judgment of the law. Times always denotes an increase. In both natural and spiritual matters, an increase always comes through sowing and reaping. I find it interesting that the word times itself suggests this increase. Those who came out of the upper room were children or sons of promise. When 1,440 is multiplied by 100, it comes to 144,000. 120 is also 12 times 10. Who did Jesus say would be trampled by the nations? Jerusalem. Who is given to the nations to be trodden underfoot? The holy city of Jerusalem. This is not speaking of the natural city, but rather the called of God. And why is this the case? Jesus tells us, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." Where is tribulation found? In the world. And what is the world that Jesus speaks of? The one between our ears. Remember, our battle is between the mindset on the flesh and the mindset on the spirit. When we begin our walk with the Lord, our mindset is still carnal because we are but infants in Christ. For this reason, we must pass through tribulation, for it is always a result of carnality. That being said, it's important to mature and not remain as children in the things of God's kingdom. Immediately following his statement in Luke 21:24, Jesus says this, "And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring." Is Jesus talking literally or spiritually or both in this statement? After all, aren't the sun, moon, and stars all seen with the woman in Revelation 12? They are. Furthermore, might the sea and the waves be explained by the following? But the wicked are like the troubled sea, when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked. Just as the fullness of time was reached before God sent forth his Son, so too the fullness of times must be reached regarding the nations. This fullness does not speak of the fruit of the Spirit, but of the fruit of the flesh, typifying lawlessness. But once fullness is reached, it doesn't stop there. Let's return to the following regarding the unclean spirit of a man. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation. As we know, 7 defines fullness, therefore 7 other spirits denotes this. Added to himself, we have 8, the beginning of a new cycle. The start of a new cycle typifies resurrection. Now let me emphasize this point. The word resurrection means a standing up again, that is, literal, a resurrection from death. In other words, once a seed falls into the ground and dies, it stands up again, albeit in a different form. And I remind you, resurrection is the divine principle of sowing and reaping. They are synonymous. To talk of one is to talk of the other. Every new generation is a resurrection, where our children, as an extension of ourselves, stand up again. And for each generation, has there not been an increase of carnality or lawlessness, due in part to the increase of the population and the technological advancements of our time? But here's the intriguing part. When Jesus came 2,000 years ago, he did not come to the Roman Empire or the world, but to his own people who were under the law. Why? Because they were considered the light of the world. First, fix the light, then the world can rejoice in it. This is why judgment begins with the house of God. Of course, we must take into account that the Lord also introduced the new covenant promise of God, shifting the entire course of mankind from the age of law to the age of grace. Now, with resurrection in mind, consider what John the Baptist said in the following. Even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. It's been said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. When we recognize that the principle of sowing and reaping works continuously, that is, over and over again, then we need only adjust our thinking and recognize its twofold outcome. If we sow to the flesh, we always reap corruption. But if we sow to the Spirit, we always reap life. We cannot expect different results in either case. That's it for this study, but be sure to join me for the next. Many thanks to all of you who consider my studies. I hope they encourage and enlighten you